young subdiscipline within geography, that is social geography, that has profoundly impacted the academic terrain and contours in a relatively short span of its existence, ever since its institutionalization as a distinct academic territory within the precincts of geography in India, perhaps not more than half a century ago, forging important and unalienable links with most other social sciences disciplines in India. As a subdiscipline, social geography in short period of time has been able to transform teaching and research in India by its relentless pursuit to reach out to the people and addressing the real problems they confront in their everyday struggle for existence in order to lead a dignified life. The subdiscipline has had a transforming role by questioning the tradition-ridden teaching and research as carried out in Indian universities and colleges, largely governed by colonial tradition of explaining away every geographical variation pitched on environmental theory. The growth and development of social geography in India in the last half a century or less has been able to dent, if not completely obliterate, the stereotype, and with varying levels of success in convincing the unsuspecting student that the environmental theory was designed to serve the interest of colonial masters in their pursuits of unhindered exploitation of resources of the colonized as an ideological tool. The subdiscipline has had an onerous responsibility to firmly place the social man to the core of all geographical analysis, replacing the environmental theory with a social theory that emphasized the role of social structure and social processes which continuously structure and restructure space. As a subdiscipline, social geography also made significant contribution in critiquing the concept of space, not merely to be treated as a stage or a container of things, but as critical in shaping and reshaping geographies all around us. Space was to be treated as critical, not incidental to our understanding. The agenda set forth by social geography in India was extremely ambitious to begin with. It was disruptive on one hand by challenging the age-old fossilized tradition of geography teaching and research and reconstructing a people-oriented new geography on the other. What has been achieved, however, is a mixed bag. More of this later. Commenting on the agenda of social geography of India in its earliest phase, Professor Ejazuddin Ahmad, who was instrumental in institutionalizing the subdiscipline, beginning with a structured course that he offered to the students of Center for the Study of Regional Development at JNU in mid-70s or early 70s, has this to say. I quote, "India's social structure is a complexity by itself. It has been further complicated by the process of development, which is uneven both in its regional spread and in terms of its impact on the social strata. While the colonial development introduced distortions of a high order, resulting in glaring regional disparities, developmental planning since independence has played no less damaging role. The initial disparities have been further accentuated as development has entered to concentrate in the enclaves favored by the British. Introduction of democracy in a society like India, which is highly tradition-ridden and characterized by a rigidly defined hierarchical social structure, created new sources of tension. India today presents more than enough evidence of these social aberrations." There is no gainsaying that the subdiscipline of social geography emerged in India much later than it evolved in the West soon after the wars. It is a fact that the Western social science was alive to real issues in society. Social geography could not remain unaffected by these trends. Thus, social geography developed in the Western world developed much in response to the political happenings of contemporary social relevance. For example, as Professor Ahmed writes, social change in attitudes and perception of prevailing reality necessitated corresponding changes in the theoretical framework adopted by social scientists. The American society, for example, was overwhelmingly influenced by the war in Vietnam. A common concern was expressed on issues as poverty and social inequality within the United States. The social relevance movement in the contemporary social sciences also affected geography, and issues such as race, crime, health, and poverty received an increasing attention. Surprisingly, Indian geographers were largely unconcerned with these developments or such other problems existing in India requiring geographical treatment for longer than desired. This is not to say that there were no issues of social concern in geographical research in India at all. There were stray researches on caste, tribe, religion, and languages, or on social mobility and transformation, but mostly written by scholars from outside the domain of geography or from outside India. Indian social sciences have been alive to the emergent issues in the wake of political, social, and economic development since independence, but geographers in general and social geographers in particular have not evinced much interest in contemporary issues of national interest. One sees social geography as an institutionalized discipline taking baby steps only in early 70s, but maturing only in recent decades. Social geography, as mentioned earlier, emerged as an enclave of teaching and research in CSRD, Center for the Study of Regional Development, JNU, in early or mid-70s, and remained so for the next few decades without much impact on universities and colleges beyond Jamuna. The disciplines even attracted derision and from some quarters who considered the subdiscipline as not true geography. I am reminded of what our president said in his speech, that JNU's geography is something different and it's perhaps not geography. Fortunately, however, notwithstanding the initial reluctance and even active resistance, social geography has received much recognition as a significant area of specialism in geography in more recent years and is part of geography syllabi in most universities and colleges and has been recognized by UGC in NATE and its model syllabus. It must be noted that in the process of institutionalization, the subject matter of Indian social geography initially benefited greatly from the efforts of many scholars working in disciplines other than geography, the notable among them being F.J. Richards, B. Subbarao, M. Wheeler, H.D. Sankalia, D.D. Kosambi, K.M. Panikar, Romila Thapar, N.K. Bosch, A.R. Desai, M.N. Srinivas, and many others from disciplines like archaeology, history, anthropology, sociology, etc., with their admirable insights of the working of Indian society within a geographical frame. Significant contributions came from Spate, K.N. Singh, A.B. Mukherjee, Schwarzberg, and some eminent Indian scholars too, bringing the subdiscipline a stature and respectability. Contribution of Munis Raza and Azazuddin Ahmed is outstanding in making social geography a preeminent field of inquiry. Ahmed's social geography as a textbook served as a catalyst in increasing acceptance of the subdiscipline all over the country. As it stands today, the subdiscipline has carved out a definite niche for itself. The initial reluctance is over, even the skepticism and aggressive opposition to the subject for not being truly geography. More and more departments are offering the course as a routine. Important contributions on multiple issues of social concern are being submitted as PhD researches. More textbooks are appearing on the book stands. All the journals are carrying research papers on the theme of social geography. Social perspectives are increasingly being adopted in geographical writings. Many papers on wide-ranging topics of social geography are presented by scholars in conferences, seminars, and symposia. The scope of social geography has vastly increased, and the social geographer today writes and talks on social issues on equal terms with scholars of other social sciences, refusing to be a mere cartographer of other sciences, contributing to unraveling of fresh insights into the problem by adding the necessary geographical perspective, correcting and complementing the understanding reached by findings made in other social science disciplines. Social geographer today writes on multiple problems faced by Indian people on such important issues of geographical reconfiguration arising due to disparities, inequalities, discrimination, poverty, post-colonialism, humanism, social pathologies, social change and transformation, globalization, gender, social and spatial justice, and many others topics continuously at work in reshaping the world and creating new spatial order. There is much to feel satisfied given the progress of the subdiscipline within a short span, but there are several disturbing aspects that characterize the subdiscipline in its present form. The quantity of course has surged with tremendous vigor, but not the quality. Commenting on the role that geographers must play in developing a proper understanding of the complex social fabric of India, Munis Raza in 1979 had indeed made a case for social geographers to take the lead. In his words, the sociologist or the anthropologist, the economist or the political scientist, tied down as they are by the tools and concepts developed in their disciplines, generally ignore the dimension which in the context of a large geographic dimension, which in the context of the large landmass like India is of crucial significance and importance. The geographer can provide the necessary corrective. Reviewing the trend of research in social geography until 1972, Raza had lamented that the quantum of work has been small, the coverage of the field has been severely restricted, and the thrust into the realm of theory has been negligible. The trend of research in this subdiscipline after 4 decades leaves one with little satisfaction with regard to the points raised by Raza. Professor Sachidanand Sinha, who is present here, a very eminent social geographer, for example, had noted emulating the tools of sociologists and social anthropologists as a major cause of the stunted growth of Indian social geography. They have most writing on the social geographies have not resisted the temptation to emulate the methodologies adopted in these social science disciplines. The subject continues to lack coherence when one looks at the course syllabi offered in different departments of geography characterized by eclecticism of a very high order. One is often confronted with the most daunting task of identifying whether an entry truly belongs to the domain of social geography or not. Part of this problem lies in the manner in which few departments of geography in India which offer social geography have treated this branch in their syllabi and courses. The diversity of topics included under this segment of knowledge in different geography departments make the matter worse and leaves an impression that the subject doesn't have anything in common. Professor H.N. Sharma, an eminent social geographer, again writing at the end of the 20th century, is of the view that social geography is yet to emerge as a potent field of study, both in terms of content coverage and conceptual and methodological developments. In its domain as a disciplinary specialism is still confined to a few centers of studies and research and is basically undermanned. The number of substantive works in the field is yet highly limited as a result perhaps of an inadequacy of a committed band of researchers in this area. The topics covered either in the textbooks or in courses rarely distinguish between a social geography approaches and as studied in population geography or cultural geography, where social geography is merely presented as social attributes of the population ignoring identity, social identity question that distinguishes social geography from other branches. Even within the research frontier, the situation is not far too different. There are many studies which rely entirely on census data as the raw material for analyzing regionally, basically read as inter-district or intra-district, not really regionally, varied patterns of socially defined populations and related socioeconomic phenomena bereft of its historical context and still following the tools of sociologists and social anthropologists, something that Professor Sinha had mentioned in his remarks while writing a review of literature, review of contributions made to social geography in one of the contributions he made to INSA. Mechanistic cartographic representation in pattern identification characterizes many researches which reveal little as far as the cutting edge of social forces is concerned. Many of them continue to rely on a theoretical base imported from outside India and employ little or no testing in the field. Nevertheless, there are also outstanding contributions made that have made the discipline stronger. My apologies to them if I sounded too critical. I end with quoting from my supervisor, Professor Ejazuddin Ahmad, who said, a pure critic is the one who spares no one, including the speaker himself. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor D.K. Naik Saab, for timely completing your statement. You have critically reviewed the progress of social geography in India, other subjects' relationship, and highlighted the contributions of Professor Ejazuddin and several other geographers who have made significant contribution in social geography. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Now I invite Professor Ramakrishna Methi to say a few words about progress of geography, progress of geomorphology. Because physical geography part is very weak, and I think Professor Methi will highlight the issues involved in geomorphology.
Please, PowerPoint. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Chairman, Sir, Professor H.S. Sharma, and it is my privilege, rather, to share the dais with so many noted academicians in India. And at the same time, it's a rare opportunity for me to meet you, a huge gatherings of finest minds who converged here to assess what we achieved in last 100 years. So far, the development of geomorphology in India is concerned, we must admit that contribution came from twin sources, one from geologists, another from geographers. And history of Indian geomorphology could be divided into 5 distinct phases. Ancient and medieval period, British period under in 18th and 19th century, first half of 20th century under British rule, second half of 20th century up to 1987 when Indian Institute of Geomorphologists is established at Allahabad, and post-IGI phase, that is 1987 and beyond. We have a long legacy in understanding river systems, coasts, mountains since the time of Rigveda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Purana. Al-Biruni in 18th century made an exclusive survey and exclusive report on Indus Valley civilization, Indus Valley, and role of geological processes in shaping the basin landscape. Few milestones we achieved in 18th and 19th century. The first one of it is establishment of Survey of India in 1767. We have to note that it is for the first time in the world such a scientific organization is established for systematic mapping and surveying. In 1802, they started Great Triangulation Survey. And as we know, numbers of new concepts, the idea of geodesy, idea of isostasy, height of Everest were achieved in this survey. Geological Survey of India was established in 1851, and geology teaching learning was introduced in India in Department of Geography, Presidency College, Kolkata, in 1892. Major contribution during this phase came from Major James Rennell. He published the Bengal Atlas in 1779, an account of Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers in 1780. Major pioneering works came from Sir Thomas Oldham, who surveyed major regions, geologically explored major regions of India. And for the first time, he gave the concept of the mechanism of earthquake, and internal structure of the earth was mainly put forward by him. Benedict Medlicott, who coined the term Gondwana and Gondwana land, the term came after him. Dr. Henry Wesley Voysey, who is considered as the father of Indian geology, and it is after him we have the comprehensive understanding of geology of India. Richard Mallet, who worked in Himalaya, Central India, Assam and Burma, and he prepared the geological map of Darjeeling. Now, great Pramothnath Bose, he was the first Indian to join GSI, and he surveyed major regions of Central India, and he advised Jamshedji Tata to establish iron and steel factory at Jamshedpur. Now, if you come to the first half of 20th century under British rule, it could be considered as a real academic infrastructure stage. Department of Geology was introduced in Calcutta University in 1916. For the first time in India, geography teaching learning was introduced at Aligarh Muslim University in 1924. And in the same department, PG teaching learning was introduced in 1931, and numbers of geographical associations were established during this period. Major contribution came from H.H. Hayden, who worked on glaciers of Himalaya, J.L. Grillington, who also worked on glaciers of Himalaya, S.G. Burrard, who worked on Himalaya and Gangetic Trough, D.N. Wadia, he worked on Himalaya and North Indian foreland, M.S. Krishnan, who wrote the book Geology of India and Burma, S.C. Chatterjee worked on geomorphology of Ranchi Plateau, S.P. Chatterjee, the father figure of Indian geography and geomorphology, who worked on Meghalaya Plateau, Nishik topography of Ranchi Plateau, Ice Age of India, river problems of Bengal, Kanan Gopal Bagchi, another stalwart who worked on Ganges Delta. Now if you come to the second half of 20th century, the post-independent phase, up to 1987, then Ojha and Siddiqui, Professor A.R. Siddiqui is sitting here, they made an exclusive survey on the history of Indian geomorphology or progress of Indian geomorphology, and the information, if we arrange decade-wise and theme-wise, the data sheet comes like this, and the graph shows the multi-picked one, which shows the preferential area of Indian geomorphology, which shows the river process and forms, then river basin analysis, regional geomorphology, and geospatial technology. These are the major themes on which the Indian geomorphologists are banking with. Now, in a nutshell, 1950s could be attributed to the decade of regional geomorphology and evolution study. 1960s could be attributed to regional geomorphology, river basin study, and process study. 1970s could be attributed to regional geomorphology and process study. Here, the slope process, glacial process, aeolian process are given importance along with the river process. 1980s could be attributed to the decade of geospatial technology, environmental geomorphology, hazard study, and process study. Now, IGI, Indian Institute of Geomorphology, was established in 1987, and after that, in every year, there was the national conferences, and the abstract volume shows the data. If we analyze the data, it shows numbers of presentations. The lower row shows the numbers of presentation as it is increasing year after year. And major themes are the still fluvial process, coastal process, then river basin analysis, hazard studies, applied geomorphology, and geospatial technology. Now in 2017, a great event we organized, the 9th International Conference of Geomorphology at New Delhi. These were the major themes of discussion and some snaps of this great event. And in this event, more than 488 participants deliberated their presentations, along with more than 320 foreign delegates coming from different countries of the world. And you can recognize him, Professor Sunil Kumar De. He was the convener of this conference, and he was the man behind this entire event. And he is trying to anchor the place of Indian geomorphology in the global scale. Now, if we come to the doctoral thesis, Shodhganga website, so far up to 12th August 2024, has recorded more than 12,800 PhD theses from geology and geography out of 148 universities and IITs. And these are how distributed institution-wise in India. And among them, the geomorphology thesis was 3,800. And it accounts for nearly 30% of the entire thesis of geography and geology. And Calcutta University ranks first in contributing to geomorphology thesis. Now, if you come to the articles published by the Indian geomorphologists and geomorphologists of India, these are two keywords. And based on these two keywords, Web of Science database during 1989 to 2024 shows that more than 11,660 articles are published by Indian geomorphologists. And these are Web of Science, in the Web of Science database. And their numbers are increasing year after year, and the maximum is recorded in 2022. And these are the major themes of the work, and those themes make some clusters. Tectonic geomorphology, evolution study, process geomorphology, hydrogeomorphology and applied geomorphology, geospatial technology, remote sensing, and the prediction models. So these are the major themes of work in which the Indian geomorphologists are contributing. And institution-wise, contribution shows that IITs, they are contributing largely, along with Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology, along with the other universities. And Indian geomorphologists are collaborating, all the countries across the world. Now, if we come to the contributors to Indian geomorphology, there are numbers of contributors, senior faculty, senior teachers, and their numbers are huge. But for this presentation, I have selected only the presidents of IGI. Please excuse me, those names I couldn't recall. Professor K.R. Dixit from Pune, Professor R. Vaidyanathan. These are their year of the chair and their contributions. For the time constraint, I am not going into the details of their contribution. Please, so I like to use this platform to recall them, recall our senior geomorphologists. Professor R. Vaidyanathan from Visakhapatnam, Professor N.K.P. Prasad Sinha, N.K.P. Sinha from Varanasi, Professor Nikhil Krishnadev from Bardwan, Professor Victor Rajamanikam from Tanjavur, Professor Manotosh Kumar Bandyopadhyay from Calcutta University, from Surendra Singh from Jodhpur, Professor Subhash Ranjan Basu from Kolkata, Professor V.K. Verma from Delhi, Professor V.K. Asthana from Kurukshetra, Professor H.S. Sharma, sir is there. Professor H.S. Sharma took the chair in 2001, and it is his list of contribution, and it is not exclusive. There are a lot more. Okay. Professor Subhash Chandra Mukhopadhyay from Kolkata, Professor Prithvish Nag from Dehradun, Professor S.R. Jog from Pune, Professor V.S. Kale from Pune, Professor N. Chandrasekhar from Tirunelveli, Professor M.N. Kaul from Jammu, Professor Dulal Chandra Goswami from Guwahati, Professor V.C. Jha from Shantiniketan, Professor Dr. Amol Kaur from Jodhpur, Professor R.K. Ganju from Jammu, Professor R.C. Pathak, Brigadier R.K. Pathak from Pune, Professor Guru Prasad Chattopadhyay from Shantiniketan, Professor Hema Achyutan from Chennai, Professor Shrikant Karlekar from Pune, Professor Ruli Kanchan from Vadodara, Professor Shavindra Singh from Allahabad, Professor Shubir Sarkar from Siliguri, Professor Ashish Kumar Pal from Midnapur, Professor Devidat Charnial from Dehradun, Professor Sunanda Bandyopadhyay, he is sitting here, Professor Sunanda Bandyopadhyay from Kolkata, Professor Milapchand Sharma sitting at the back, from Delhi, Professor Sunil Kumar De sitting at the front from Shillong. And he's the present president of International Association of Geomorphologists. Now, so far we have discussed about the development and our achievement. In the morning, Professor Sinha said that we must be critical enough. We have to analyze our limitations, our difficulties, and our drawbacks, our failures. So if we come to that, then we found that in Britain, much of the development, major development in geomorphology was already accomplished at least 100 years before we started geography teaching learning in India. You see the major theories and major developments in Britain. In America also, they have accomplished, they went a long way while we started geography teaching learning in India. But what happened? If we compare the timeline, you see, in India, we started Survey of India much ahead of them. And say, Geological Survey of India was also established as a contemporary to the similar institutes in UK and USA. But while the quantitative revolution in geomorphology by Stoller was done in America, by Chorley in Britain was done, that time we are starting geography teaching learning in India. So we lagged behind. So the institutes, those were established under the colonial period, yes sir, just 1 minute. They became the instrumental to address the colonial interests. They were instrumental to extract the resource from our country. They gave less priority for academic improvement and academic achievements of our country. But thanks to remote sensing and GIS, we adopted this technique almost simultaneously, and our publications are at par now to the developed countries. So this remote sensing and GIS technology helped us to revive. So in conclusion, we have a long legacy of geomorphic understanding, but during 18th century to the first half of 20th century, Indian geomorphology was trapped into the colonial interest. In the second half of 20th century, much emphasis was given on river basin analysis, regional geomorphology, and process study. Real formalization of Indian geomorphology was started after we established Indian Institute of Geomorphology. And 1990s onward, geospatial technology helps us to recover the Indian geomorphology. And 2007 was the great event in history of Indian geomorphology. We organized 9th International Conference of Geomorphology at New Delhi. But we are to be cautious enough. We are banking more on the geospatial technology. And this over-dependency of geospatial technology is a serious threat to our rigorous field study, which was our legacy. The process study was our legacy from the very beginning. Our senior geomorphologists and all the senior teachers, they banked on rigorous process study. And this process study is seriously being hampered at present. With this, thank you to the organizers, and thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thank you very much, Professor Methi, for quantifying the progress of geomorphology in India and comparing with the British and USA contribution. I agree with you that over-dependence on geospatial technology is really a problem with the geomorphologists because they are depending mainly on remote sensing and data generation and all these things, while the fieldwork is lacking. So in geomorphology, if you will have more and more fieldwork, the conclusions will be more effective and you can present your thing in a proper way. So dependency is there because most of the data generated by satellite and other things, definitely it gives a good picture of the landscape, but fieldwork is also essential. We should not overlook fieldwork. So that's the best contribution. Thank you very much, Professor Methi, for quantifying the whole thing. Now I invite Professor Ram Babu Bhagatji to speak on progress of population geography in India.
Honorable Chairperson, Professor H.S. Sharma, dear colleagues and friends. So, I will present and navigate little bit what is happening in demography as well as population geography. So when we start and see the history of demography, John Grant was called the father of demography. John Grant was a hairdresser. He was a merchant selling thread and buttons in London. And he wrote a book or pamphlet, Natural and Political Observation on Bills of Mortality. And this was plague-related death. We have seen the COVID-related death during this pandemic. There was huge plague-related deaths in various parts of Europe, and this was particularly in England. So, but what was good thing is that deaths were recorded in Paris Register. And then weekly data were published by the church. It is compiled for the London, city of the London. And what he did, he tried to find out which are the weeks or which are the years where the plague mortality was higher than normal weeks, months, years. So what is the difference? So whole demography originated through the study of mortality. And then he also tried to tabulate death by age. And then once we try to tabulate death by age, we can get a mean age of death. And mean age of death, again, when we calculate the death by age, some sort of life expectancy we can get it. So he was giving the rudimentary knowledge of even life table, life expectancy. At the same time, and this was published in 1662. 1662. Why I'm saying this? This was much before any of our known classical geographer, Kant, Humboldt, Ritter. At the same time, his friend was there. He's called William Petty, and he wrote another book during same time, Political Arithmetic. It was a phase of mercantilism, and he was arguing for more and more population growth. The type of argument now also you see sometime recently. So population growth was argued. More population growth means more trade and more wealth of the nation. William Petty was there. So this was the story of the 17th century and what is happening in 18th century. In 18th century, 1776, Adam Smith writes a book called Inquiry into the Wealth of the Nation. 1776 is the year when American Revolution took place. And 1789, French Revolution taking place. In French Revolution, there was a revolutionary called Condorcet. And at the same time, in England, there was a political scientist, Godwin. He was writing on political justice. And they were arguing about population also. Population, if you transform institutions, population can be taken care of. And Condorcet was telling that human beings are entirely perfect, and it is the institutions and support that matters. And human longevity is limitless. Now we have a human longevity in India about 70, 71 years. And in the Western countries, it is 85, 86 years, including Japan. Can we imagine life expectancy 100 years? Of course, we see people of 100 years. And the possibility is that 120 years, 140 years. So Condorcet at that time was telling. Now, on the backdrop of this, Malthus writes a book. And I advise you to see the title of the book, not only essay on the population. It's a long title, where in title itself he writes and condemns Godwin and Condorcet. They are wrong, they are utopian, they are not correct. And what I am saying is correct. Population is a problem. This is because it is growing geometrically and food supply is growing arithmetically. This is I am giving you the background. But this does not lead to, so in the classical political economy, Malthus, Marx, and Ricardo, they were introduced population into their theories. But in fact, demography became coherent discipline only in the 1940s. In the 1940s, it was the war period, Second World War, and there are two demographers or sociologists, one statistician and another sociologist. They explained and enunciated the theory of demographic transition, although it originated earlier also in the writing of Thompson, but it was Kingsley Davis who wrote a book, World Demographic Transition, and it was published in American Sociological Association. And there was a person, Notestian. He wrote Population, a Long View, and it has come in the book chapter. And these were the two things where you can, it can be said that this was the articulation of demographic transition theory. So demography has a long history, but then demography as a discipline has not a very long history. It starts, any discipline is a discipline only when it has a theory, because the theory is the articulation of idea. Theory is not something right or wrong. Theory is something that gives a coherent way of organizing idea. It is incomplete. It can be criticized. There can be alternative theory. But then theory is very, very important. Now, what was happening in population geography? In population geography or geography as such, we see in the writing of Humboldt, Ritter, and more importantly, in the writings of Retzel and Vidal de la Blas. Retzel wrote a book called Anthropogeography, and Vidal de la Blas wrote a book that was in French, later translated, Principles of Human Geography. But what they were writing? They were writing man and environment relationship. So man as a factor, man as a geographical factor, and how man could widen its freedom. And who was subjugating freedom? What is the barrier to the freedom? It was nature. So it was man versus nature, the entire thing was there, population was not there. But they were talking about population density, population growth. In both the books, Anthropogeography and Principles of Human Geography, there are chapters devoted on density of population, distribution of population, but it was only in terms of man-nature interaction or man-nature relationship. There was nothing talked about composition of population. And that is what very, very fundamental, that is important from the demographic transition point of view, age transitional point of view, migration and mobility transition and urban transition. The age composition leads to various types of transition. So actually, population geography started in 1953. And that has happened in the address of Trevartha. As you know, Trevartha was a climatologist and physical geographer. And he pleaded that something is lacking in geography. It is not that only two blocks you make, two compartments you make man or environment or nature and man. Somewhere, where is the population? And then he put a tripod. At the top, population was there. And in nature, physical earth, nature, physical earth, and then cultural earth. So culture, nature, and then population. So this way so what he was talking about, he was talking about place of population in geography. And when we recognize the place of population in geography, then only the population geography can take place. So it was coming from a climatologist, the argument that yes, somewhere geography is incomplete and population should play a pivotal role. Then we find that a lot of books were written. J.I. Clarke from Great Britain, Population Geography, very famous book. I think that was a fantastic book. And then Woods, Robert Woods, he writes a book, Population Analysis in Geography, and he pleads that let population geography be more demographic. So population geographers should use life table analysis, should use population projections, not confined to only density and distribution. And then composition, of course. Demographic transition is actually a type of flow where not only size of the population changes, but composition of population and characteristics of population changes, and it has impact on distribution. So this was actually the phase, and during this phase in India also, Department of Population Geography in Chandigarh, Punjab University, where Professor Ghosal was there, it started and did some pioneering work in density, distribution, migration. A lot of work has been done, and various other universities also sporadically, but then it was very huge work has been done. But what happens then in the 90s? 90s, there is a fundamental change in the way we look at population issues. In 1994, there was ICPD. ICPD, International Conference on Population and Development, and it argued that we need to look at population, integrate other aspects, integrate political and social aspects into the population studies. It is not simply density, distribution, and development and quality of life and what determines in terms of Malthusian or Marxist way, but we have to have social and political issues integrated into the population processes and population dynamics, and it brings into the center stage of reproductive and sexual rights. Reproductive and sexual rights, it is the choice of the people to have fertility or family planning, and also choice of various other types of health-seeking behavior, etc. That is what reproductive and sexual health rights were there. Along with that, child rights, maternal and child rights. So these became actually the fundamental principles how to look at the population issues and change and dynamics of population. And this brought a lot of theoretical changes or incorporation of theories in geographical analysis of population. And at that time, a new journal started. In 1995, International Journal of Population Geography has been started. And this journal actually has been vehicle of publishing a lot of population issues from this point of view, reproductive, child health, sexual health, rights, rooted in human rights, and a lot of theoretical issues has been incorporated. So what were the theoretical issues that has been incorporated into the population? And I mentioned three of the important theories from social sciences. I say social sciences, and I think it's very important those who are in human geography, in social geography, or population geography, they should read it, or if we should also make effort through our organization and platform to educate our researchers and students. And these three are like. So one was the Giddens theory of structuration. What is important in Giddens theory of structuration? There is a structure and there is an agency. So till now, if you see structural Marxism and anything, it is something of deterministic, where structure is there, where is the agency? So agency is important, and agency comes through various types of characteristics, various types of capability, and fulfillment of rights. If somebody's rights are fulfilled, one can be active, one can be agents of change for himself, herself, and for the society. So this was hugely, this has been used, structure, agency, and the theory of structuration. It is, of course, sociology. It has elements of time, space. So this was used. There has been criticism also. Each theory has a lot of criticism. The second theory that has been used in population analysis was Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault was, again, a sociologist, and his idea of biopolitics and biopower. And what was biopolitics? It is the politics of life, politics of death, politics of migration. Politics of life, politics of death. And where is the control? State has the control on life. State can promote life. Who can take life? Life can be taken by only state. And if somebody does suicide, it is a punishable act. This is a crime. So and then why state is doing this type of politics? Like politics of life, politics of death, and politics of migration, because state wants to control the people. It is the people who constituted the state in social contract theory. If you see again John Rousseau's social contract theory, how state has originated. So state is not a divine. State has been constituted by people. That was the Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke's idea. Before that, state has been created by divine power. And that's how monarchy functions such a long time. What French Revolution did, that this divine idea of state has been thrown out. State is not divine. State is constituted by the people through social contract. And that is how social contract is expressed in our constitution or constituent assembly, which drafted the constitution. Why I am saying this? Because rights are the relationship between state and people. So people constituted a state, and state must grant the rights so that people can develop as a citizen, full citizen, and that is about the development. So development means about agency, creating agency. It is about capability. It is about fulfillment of social and economic rights. So this is the second theory. Third theory was geographical historical materialism, and where the David Harvey's contribution comes, where he modified that historical materialism, bringing into geographical materialism. And it is very important we are talking about built environment. I think built environment doesn't serve more purpose. Built environment is something, again, man-environment relationship, and you end in somewhere Malthusian trap. What is more important from geographical historical materialism is the production of space. So production of space includes built environment, but production of space then becomes a type of resource, or it is a wealth, space getting commodified. Market enters into space getting commodified, space is produced, space is sold, and space is not confined to land, it is going vertical also. That's how urbanization process is unfolding. If you don't have land, okay, you can go vertical, several towers, several story buildings. And so this production of space. So this theory I'm saying, it's very important, and the coming generation and researchers should know. And as I told you, no theory is perfect, but theories are very important to understand how ideas can be organized, what are its potential and what are its limitations. So lastly, I would like to conclude that the population geography, and this geographical historical materialism has been much explained in labor market, in migration, economic growth, urbanization, where the migration is an important component. So lastly, I want to say that the population geography is in very nascent stage, but it has lot of potential. And when we look at from this theoretical point of view, then the boundary between population geography and social geography, and boundary between population, social and urban geography getting blurred. It becomes something of space and place characteristics, where human agency is important, and human agency is guided and controlled by the structures. And with this structure, we want to have increasing freedom, and through freedom, we must have equality, because without equality, there is no fraternity. So you can see in our constitution, these three words are not only political. These are the ontological foundation of social sciences. If geography has to be social science, one has to have an ontological foundation of social science. And this is why we want to study social science. Actually, we want to understand social science for well-being. And then we have a critique of what development, etc., etc. Okay. So this is how this is getting blurred. And we must have capacity building, lastly, in terms of both theory, I told you, and in terms of understanding data. It is not that census is not being held, but people, to understand census, that also declining. If I say, tell me Delhi population of Guwahati, out of 199 may give wrong answer, Guwahati. Because one need to define what is Guwahati. Guwahati may be three Guwahati. Guwahati Municipal Corporation, Guwahati Urban Agglomeration, Guwahati Metropolitan Guwahati. Unless you write in bracket, now journalists give wrong answer, and our also experts give wrong answer. So the capacity building becomes very important. And then theoretical aspects, as I mentioned, the only three theories, not many theories, to begin with, I think very important for our coming generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for tracing the growth of population geography from 1953 onward, and critically evaluating various theories of population growth and these things. Population is very important because we are passing through Anthropocene era, and man is dominating factor in 21st century. So it's very important, sir. Population is very important. Thank you, sir. Now I invite Professor Sacharita Sen. I think she will complete within 15 minutes so that we can finish this by 4 o'clock.
Shubhajit, password. Shubhajit. আচ্ছা শুভজিতের এটা কিন্তু না, এটা শুভজিতেরটা
Oh. It's okay. I think it's copied there also. I'll start because we are running short of time. It's copied in that also.
তোর কম্পিউটার পাসওয়ার্ড কি 4543
Huh, yes. I've got, yeah. Switch to this, please. Excuse me. এটা স্ক্রিনে কেন এরকম আসছে? Excuse me.
It is opened, madam.
Okay. There, it should be shifted to this. Okay? Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I'm glad that, thank you very much for having me here. It's absolute pleasure as always. I'm glad that all of us seem to be having different frameworks for capturing our sub-disciplines, which we have given responsibilities for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first trace very quickly the evolution of economic geography in the global context. And I'm then going to actually, within that framework, try and understand what has happened in India. And I'll spend some time to provide a current context of the economy in India to provide future directions in which the subject needs to work. Now, I'll take a time-space kind of a framework where I'm going to separate the colonial period initially, then second period marked with the state-controlled or closed economy dirigisme between the global north and global south, that is earlier colonial times there was a flow, and the third, the neoliberalism or the globalization period. So the way economic, as all other disciplines, I don't think it's special to this, subjects have been responding to what has been happening around us, and it has changed over a period of time. But what I'm going to argue for the global context is that the way the subject has moved has primarily answered, maybe not towards the last period, but definitely the first two periods, address the concerns of what we call the global north today. It has not seen it from the perspective of the global south. So period one, we have this, this is shared. Commercial geography, of course, was the term given to economic geography in the beginning. Then you come to regional geography, which of course shares multiple sub-disciplines, not only economic geography, but it ended with economic geography. So initially physiography, etc. was discussed. And then we had the first, so these two were descriptive periods of economic geography. Then we entered a period of analytical geography, which started with the quantitative revolution, and particularly in economic geography, so quantitative economic geography and location theories. Now, I have to mention that this was the time when we had greater interaction, in fact, almost over-dependence, if I may say so, and contributions from economics or economists. So I'll come to this later. This has advantages and problems. Now the second period, which is the closed economy period, continues with quantitative economic geography. And I'll just go to, after this, to argue that, what were the concerns because of which we evolved the way it was. Then a brief period of behavioral economic geography, where really the work was primarily to understand from the standpoint of large units, large industrial units, acknowledging the fact that, there are other aspects other than profit maximizing behavior and their locations. So it looked at that. And then we come to political economic geography, which comes to the Cold War period. So of course, it's continued now as in period 3 also in a very major way, and a lot of the work that we are doing. And this is the period where I'm saying that, in fact, the work done globally also considers the perspective of the global south. Then we have critical economic geography. Then we have new economic geography, Paul Krugman and others. Again, there is, I would say that the father of, or mother, whatever way, of new economic geography is really quantitative economic geography. It derives from that, with some changes, of course, in the context of globalization. And we have an evolutionary economic geography, which kind of is in the lines of new economic geography, in the sense that it looks at networks, it looks at location models. It looks as like new economic geography, increasing returns to scale. But the difference is that it focuses on regions in particular and not so much of the global flows, which new economic geography does. Now, to understand how this has happened, the rationale for this, in period 1, there was a need to understand geographies of the colonies. So they knew very little about the colonies which was taken over, and production and trade was the main theme. So the theme was really, the approach was a systematic approach, different from the regional geography, which had regional approach. Now here, there's, I want to, at the cost of spending a little bit of time, economic geography and geography got its exclusive identity when it actually posed region as a major standpoint. However, regions by definition are unique, and that is what it would argue. However, given the colonial mindset, there was Hettner's work. If you read that, you will actually see that there was a hierarchization of regions, which was not meant to be the so there was an element of environmental determinism given with the spirit of colonialism and racism. Then you have, of course, the need to understand, so this is different. When quantitative economic geography came, the need to understand location and how the flows are coming from the colonies. When we move to period 2, the location theories continued, however, with a different kind of focus, which was, suddenly flows of raw materials were blocked from the colonies. So really you needed to understand within your nation state how this would happen. So this actually borrowed a lot of assumption from the classical economics, and that, as I was saying, has its problems. So just briefly, constant returns to scale or perfect competition, the assumptions. I don't have the time to explain, but they are actually inconsistent with a spatial map. It actually assumes that the world is a dimensionless space, but we actually do location via that, so that there is a problem over there. Then, of course, this I've already said, but I won't mention, there was this Cold War thing where really political economy geography started, where two different kind of economic regimes were proposed, one by erstwhile USSR and the other was USA. And there was a whole stream of work, contestations, etc. Third period, post-liberalization, space and economics were brought together in a very big way, and again, this really looks at the mechanics of globalization and the flows, etc. Multinational corporations and their production geographies, flexibility being inbuilt into it. This has been studied in detail. Change of role of state has been studied, which is very, very crucial, also from the perspective of Global South. Then of dependency across countries, within countries, inequalities across countries, within countries. Capital-labor relationships in some ways, in say, starting from David Harvey's work. across the globe and how it plays out in terms of spaces, in particular mobility of capital within minutes, which is a great change. And then the critical economic geography comes from the fact of rejection of exclusive lens of class, and that it is argued that this is not adequate and there should be identities, social identities and inequalities which should be considered. When I come to India, I'm dividing it briefly into two different periods, 1950s to 1980s. So 50s and 60s, you see a continuation with a lag effect, if I may say so, from the global context, both with systematic and regional approaches. So a lot of work was done on agriculture and industry from a systematic approach, and regional economic geographies in almost the same line. So physical divisions, land use, resource base. If you look at the economic geography textbooks published then, it really followed this. Industries, trade and transport, description of people, and sometimes these connections were missing. There has been very detailed work on regions and agricultural efficiency and diversification in India. Muhammad Shafi is one name which comes to my mind during this time. 1970s and 80s, industrial location, industrial policies, and how Indian nation states under policy that has impacted location, sometimes in backward regions. This has been looked at. Hierarchical locations of market, little bit mechanical, not so analytical. And urban planning has been focused on within location theories. It attends, the work in India attends greatly to Green Revolution, addresses the concerns, both in terms of its regional implications and in terms of, so it covers productivity, change in cropping pattern, non-traditional cropping patterns, etc., as well as economic inequalities and spatial inequalities. Then we have planning and urban geography. Flows, Munis Raza's work really deserves mention. It's, I think, a great piece of work on trade and internal trade, that is internal trade and effect on regional development. So that is one area. What has been missing in all of this? The idea of the nation state. This work has been done outside of economic geography, and economic relationships embedded in that how different regions have
already done.
Okay, so I'm going to really, so there are these three new economic geography, political economic geography, critical economic geography, which has been worked on. But let me move on, even though this was really my job. There are two things. Let me put forward two different things. The context in which we should look at the future of the subject. One is the inequality and the way it is increasing. So the top 10% of the people was holding 45% of the wealth in 81, 63% of the wealth in 12, and in 22, 81% of the wealth. Look at the increase and look at the decades. The second, what Professor Sinha was mentioning, this you already know, the COVID period. The question here is the space hidden here. Where from people are walking, where are they going to? Why did they go to that place and why they are forced to go? So this is the thing. Now I'm going to skip the rest. The last part of it is which direction do we go to? I'm sorry, I think I've missed out kind of major arguments here. Now, I think there has been a focus, if I was able to actually elaborate on what has happened in 90s, there is a focus on economic distribution and investments and where the activities are located. Sanjay Chakravarti is one person who's done a lot of work. What has not been done is bringing together economic and the social. So I don't think the kind of inequalities that we are seeing here can be explained only by class. You have to have caste and gender built in. That work has been done in social geography, but not in economic geography. So I'm making an argument that this should come together. To connect the economic and the environmental, which I think, again, Professor Sinha was mentioning in the beginning, as to how resources are being kind of used now, how they're becoming priced, to strengthen elements of geographies of labor. We have only done geographies of production. Geographies of labor has been missed. So that is one. Within this, the agriculture and the urban connects, because that is really, again, we have missed out on that. Specialities of government, corporate, and citizen. This triad has to be explored in terms of, Then changing federal relationships and how center, including how funding, the whole logic of funding has changed, and what is its implication for regional geography. Bringing together political economic geography and critical economic geography again, and then bringing together the idea of space and place. We haven't done enough of that. Untouched area of geographical implications of financialization, which is really footloose, but really driving the economy, where we are financializing risk too. Carbon trading is one example of that. We haven't done enough of that. Merging subdisciplines, Professor Bhagat actually talked about that. I have the same argument. And lastly, doggedly pursue the distribution story with a refusal to stop with geographies of growth and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sucharita ji. You have very well highlighted the development of economic geography global to Indian context. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, Professor Kumaraswamy.
Respected Chairman, the learned audience, I am standing before you at the critical time before going for tea, and I will take only 10 or 12 minutes and complete it. The thing is, if you look at the associations, geographical associations in India, it started in 1925, 23, 24, and then now it is coming up. If you study the activities or active associations in India, there are less than 12 with publications and all. If you take from south, it is only the Indian Geographical Society in Chennai, Bangalore, they are publishing 2 journals, and then in Pune, they have 2-3 journals, your IIG, Deccan, and then Mughal Parishad, and so on. Bombay, nothing. And then going to Delhi, you have Annals of IIG, Nagi, then Banaras, then in Calcutta, 2-3, and then Northeast, you have 2, and the third is coming up. If you take 25 years publications, volume number 25 plus, handful, very few, less than 6. And then this is all right. Which one is nearing 100 years, volume 100, only one, that is Indian Geographical Journal. It is the 99th, is 2024, it is completed, and 2025, it is 100th volume. It is coming up. It is continuously, it is coming up. No society has published 100 volumes continuously. If you go to Banaras or Aligarh Muslim University, the Karsan journal was discontinued. And then they have started in 40s another journal, and so on. Then if you look at 2 journals or 3 journals by the same department, only a couple comes. One is Allahabad University, Bangalore University, then your Pune University. These are the 3 universities which are publishing 2+ journals. Okay, this is second part. Third part is, how many journals are there in UGC CAR list? Handful, 5 or 6. Other 5, 6 are from other disciplines. Who has given the permission to enter into the geographical domain? It is us. I don't know who were all there in the committee, and then how they have accepted these journals into geographical domain. This is the third part. Fourth part is whether all the journals are entering into Scopus. Only one. All other journals are 5, 6 geographical journals are there in CAR list. CAR list is only a preliminary thing, preliminary entrance, and your IAG transaction has entered into Scopus. Are there any aberrations in the statistics? I think nothing, no dispute on this. Now, I have studied all the associations, and almost 80–90% of the associations are defunct. They are not functioning because of local politics or any other reason. And most of the associations could not, because I have talked with almost all associations. They say that we have some conflicts, and it is we have lost the publication, because if you do not have a mouthpiece, then that is the end of the society. If the journal is not published for 5, 6 years or 10 years, then you cannot recuperate. The reason is you cannot get back that back volumes or publications or articles 10 years before. How do you get it? You cannot get, and therefore, this is the problem, this is the situation. I will narrate the other things later. So probably the first line says that during the British era, we have different educational systems in schools, colleges and universities, and each university has they have their own, say, the methodology of evaluation, introducing the subject, and so on. Say, for example, one thing is, before 1911, in Madras University, they have geography in the matriculation level. It was called physiography and not geography. It may be a surprising fact for you. Then it was only the traditional geography. It is called what and where geography. They call this as a what and where geography. It is a traditional geography. They don't call it as a traditional geography, but this is. It was about continents, then about oceans, seas, rivers, and so on. So what is the height of the, say for example, Professor C.V. Raman, the Nobel laureate, he explains that if I would have studied geography, then I could have enjoyed Alps and Rockies like anything. So that situation comes in, even if we go to other areas, with our knowledge, we perceive the beauty, the geography of that area. Okay, now later came is the modern geography, that is called why, how, and wherefore modern geography. This is the terms they use for modern geography, because the author of modern geography, Professor Kassin, who inaugurated the Indian Geographical Society in 1926, he introduced these words. Okay. The foundation was laid during the British period, 1920s. First, they say it is introduced in Lahore. Even our chairman, Professor H.S. Sharma, said that it is Lahore. But we don't have the evidence. Even when I was talking with Professor P.S. Tiwari, he says, still I have the doubt. Because matriculation, everywhere it was there. But whether it was there in Lahore, whether it was introduced in Lahore as a graduate study, a graduate program or not, still we have the doubt. Number two, it was then introduced in Aligarh. Still in some of the articles in IIG I have studied, professor was saying that yes, they introduced in Aligarh, but due to the lack of faculty and infrastructure, the degree was not awarded. Still a dispute. Probably, I'm sorry for creating a confusion, but the thing is, unless you make an evidence, then probably that will lead to, because everywhere it is secondary source or tertiary source or fourth stage source, they quote it. But I want the evidence for this. Then here in the Department of Geography at Teachers College, Saidapet, they had created one Department of Geography, and it was headed by Lakshmana Iyer. He developed all the instruments for teaching geography, and the program they started was LT, that is Licentiate of Training. LT program was offered, and they created the thing. This was the first turning point to geography. Britishers accepted this as a discipline introduced in colleges. The second turning point was associations, establishing the associations. One was started in Madras, and the other was Carson Geographical Society at Aligarh. Then I was going through the literature, who was Carson and why they have named it as a Carson. And there was a story, but the brief thing is, Carson was a geographer. He was associated with Royal Geographical Society. And there was a gender bias in Royal Geographical Society. Women were not admitted during that time. And he came to Aligarh and then started the department, that is, I am coming up. But the thing is, these two associations were simultaneously started. 27th March of 1925, it started in Aligarh. On 31st of March, 1925, it started in Chennai. Only 4 days gap. Then these were all the people who were associated with the starting of this. Professor Geddes, before coming to Bombay University, because the government of India sanctioned some block grant to 3 universities, because there were only 3 universities at that time, Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. So they gave a lump sum grant, and Professor Geddes was invited to head the sociology department in Bombay. And Professor Slaughter from London, he was invited to start economics department in Madras. And I do not know the fact about Calcutta University, but the thing is, when Slaughter came to Madras, he found the lack of knowledge of geography, and they started a committee called Slaughter Committee, Greaves Slaughter Committee, and then they submitted a report, and that was about starting a geography, and for that reason it was started in the Teachers College, Saidapet, Madras. Okay. This Dr. J.H. Cousins is there in the last but one. He was working in a college in Madras. He was a disciple or a student of Professor Herbertson. Herbertson's student. He was also working for refresher courses in London, and then he only initiated the Indian Geographical Society. Okay, these are all the people. In the inaugural session in 1925-26, it was formally inaugurated in Presidency College, Madras Presidency College, and it was inaugurated. It was presided by Ramasamy Iyer, C.P. Ramasamy Iyer. He was Diwan of Trivandrum Princely State. He was Vice Chancellor of Trivandrum State. He was simultaneously Vice Chancellor of Banaras Hindu University and also Annamalai University. So he was the presiding over the inaugural address, and it was, the inaugural address was given by Professor Cousins. Okay. Then it was followed by Patna Geographical Society, Patna, in 1929, yes, sir. Then Calcutta Geographical Society, Bombay Geographical Association, not the society, because Bombay Geographical Society is different. It is merged with the Asiatic Society of India, Asiatic Society, and that was a different thing. Then the great personalities of the subject were given, starting from N. Subramaniam. He was behind all the Indian Geographical Society, and so on. So all these names are there. First, Madras Geographical Association, they started the LT program, Licentiate of Training. Then they have the refresher courses, summer schools, annual conferences, field works, and it was an all India program. People from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, they participated in this because they have the names, they have given all the names and so on. Then the third turning point of this, the associations was the Indian Science Congress Association. It was a Silver Jubilee Association in 1938. Before that, 3 years before 1938, that is 1935, they established the committee, and because in the British Science Congress, they have a geography section. But in Indian Science Congress, there is no geography section, only geology is there. Some 10 geographers were invited for the conference, and there was no session. So what they did was, they divided the geology section into two, and then they started in indoor session. In the indoor, they had the Indian Science Congress 36th session, 23rd session, and then next year it was in Hyderabad. Then next year it was 25th Silver Jubilee session at Calcutta, and they had a session. Okay, sir. So all the 10 geographers attended, and later, now it is called the Earth System Science session. It is merged with geology and geography. So they changed the Madras Geographical Association into Indian Geographical Society, and so on. So the fourth one was the 21st International Geographical Congress held in New Delhi, and it was awakening geography, and therefore several universities started the geography department. Say, for example, 36 universities are operating, and finally, if you get in 1971, it was 48 universities. And a number of associations were started, so including the transactions at Patna, Deccan Geography in Secunderabad, now in Pune, Geographical Outlook in Ranchi, Indian Journal of Geography in Jodhpur, Geographical Knowledge in Kanpur, Geographical Viewpoint in Agra, and 2 Hindi journals, and so on. So this was it. Okay. The fourth revolution is paperless publication. So when the paperless publication comes, then almost all society has come out with the publication in digital form, and now we are uploading this. Every year we are uploading. Maybe you may be seeing most of the publications in digital mode. So these are all the associations are societies, Indian Geographical Societies. So about 50 societies are functioning. Most of them are defunct. And these are all the lists. So it was the Indian Geographical Society, then simultaneously Aligarh Geographical Society, earlier it was called Karsan, and so on. It goes like that. like that, Scopus, the UGC approved list is also there, that red things are not purely geographical associations. Okay, in 2020, we organized one national level event with Professor R.B. Singh as chairman, and then we invited most of the associations, and then they participated, and there was a session on how to improve the relationship between various associations and so on. So we asked 10 questions from each society, and they have given 15 minutes time for presentation. Okay. What is required for these associations? One is maintaining the website, regular maintenance of the websites, and fund is required, so probably you can get the fund from various agencies like ICSSR is giving for printing of journals. Then develop or revive the existing or old or extinct societies, probably that is second one. Third is conducting quiz. We have given example of Maharashtra and Assamese local journals are also coming. Third one is conducting talent test and so on. So all that, because I love the Hill Geographer, they are maintaining this. They are conducting talent test and so on. They give the awards and so on. And the fourth one is we need a federation, because in 1938 onwards we are saying that we need a combined, maybe the virtual union is all right. All the associations can join together. No one is small or no one is big. So at least thank you very much for inviting me from other association to your association, then talk about all these things. Thank you very much. And yes, this is the one I wanted to give. The forefathers had planted the modern geography, 1920s. Our teachers have nurtured the subject, and let us protect and leave it safely to the younger generation to develop its sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumar Swami, for highlighting the progress of geographical associations in India. Friends, the development of geography cannot be discussed in 2 hours. However, our distinguished speakers have tried to highlight progress of geography in different branches. So I would like to congratulate all the 5 speakers for their good presentations and development which they have visualized about the progress of geography in India. I will not take time because I just want to tell one thing, that Indian Council of Social Science Research started early 90s, progress of geography in India, and the 6th report, 6th publication has already come. It was in 2009. I think whatever material is available in these volumes plus the discussion that has taken place here, if we can assemble all these things and prepare a volume on the progress of geography, I think that would be a good contribution, compiling the whole progress of Indian geography in the. So that this is my humble suggestion. IIG should take it and IIG should consider it, and I think that would be a good contribution from the IIG side. Also, when we have planned 100 years of geography in India, so that can be an achievement by the IIG. With this, again, I express my sincere sense of gratitude to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Professor Sunil Dey.
Thank you, sir, for your beautiful proposal. It may be well considered by the IIG. On behalf of the organizing committee, please, sir, wait. We thank you, Professor H.S. Sharma, for beautifully chairing this session. He has already made up at least 20 minutes from which we are running late. Thank you, sir, once again. And we also thank the speakers, Professor D.K. Nayak, Professor Ramkrishna Maiti, Professor Rambabu Bhagat, Professor Sucharita Sen, and Professor K. Kumarasamy for their deliberations on different aspects on 100 years of geography in India. I would request Professor H.S. Sharma from our behalf to offer some token of appreciation to the speakers. May I request our students to come on the dais? Firstly, Professor D.K. Naik. Come one by one, please. Professor Ramkrishna Maiti. Professor Rambabu Bhagat. Professor Rambabu Bhagat. Professor Sucharita Sen. And lastly, Professor K. Kumarasamy. Thank you, sir. Okay. Jilo. We'll have a tea break for 15 minutes. After that, shortly we'll come back at 4:30 because our first speaker will be Professor Nikki Valpidou from University of Athens Greens. She will join online. So may I request you to come back by 4:30 here.